Welcome to reInvent. Welcome to my session. My name is Eugene Stepanov. I'm a senior database solution architect with AWS. And today's session, will be what's new in Amazon RDS for SQL Server. Before we begin, I would like to thank every single one of you for attending reInvent, for attending my session, and for giving me this opportunity to be part of your event. It's a pleasure and a privilege. With that, let's jump straight to the agenda. Now, as title suggests, this is what's new talk. What's new since last reInvent? Last 12 months, give or take. Now, we've been busy. We've delivered a bunch of new functionality, tons of new capabilities, and we only have 30 minutes. I'm not going to be able to talk about every single feature we released since last reInvent. What I've done instead, I picked 10, 11 most impactful ones. In my opinion, these features will create most impact and already creating that impact. And we're going to talk about every single one of them and then some more. But as you're going through this list, you're probably asking yourself, okay, what's in here for me? And I would suggest that if you're looking for ways to run your SQL Server workload on RDS cheaper, to make it more performant, and to unlock and enable more use case and scenarios, you've come to the right session. With that, let's jump straight to it. Price reduction. I'll start with the best one. Effective July 1st of this year, 2020, we reduced the prices for Enterprise Edition Multi-Z. Now, we reduced prices for both, for on-demand instances as well as reserved instances. There's not much to say here. The numbers on the screen, I would say we are averaging 25% here, which is significant. As Andy Jassy says, it's easy to drop the prices. It's much more difficult to be able to afford it. And we at RDS been working very hard to be able to afford it and pass those savings down onto you, our customers. Next one, R5B instance family. This is very, very exciting. R5B is our latest addition to our R5 family. It just went live just a few days ago. And it delivers 3x EBS performance compared to R5 family. Now, let's take a look at the numbers. The IOPS column and EBS bandwidth column. So on average, roughly, you will see 3x improvement. And what that means, it means that you can use this today as a very effective and very efficient cost optimization technique. Let's consider a case for a second where prior to this, let's say if you were trying to achieve 30,000 IOPS, you would be looking at least at 8x large. Now, with R5B, even with 4x large, you can achieve more than 30,000 IOPS. The same can be said about, let's say, 60,000 IOPS. If on R5 you were trying to achieve 60,000 IOPS, you would be looking at least at 16x large. And now you can achieve more just with 8x large. So again, in the use case where you are storage subsystem bound, whether it's IOPS or bandwidth, and you have a relatively underutilized RAM and CPU, that's a great use case for a cost optimization using this new instance family. Please take a look at that. Next one, AD integration. AD integration have been around for quite some time. this feature's been around for a long time. And I discuss this feature with my customers on a daily basis. And this conversation usually goes like this. Hey, I looked at RDS, seems like a great platform. I would like to bring my SQL Server workload to RDS, but I also have my identity store. It's running on-prem. It's Microsoft Active Directory, obviously. And I have no intention of giving that up. How I can join the existing domain, um, um, how I can join my RDS instance to the existing domain, essentially. And again, this use case has been supported use case for a long time, and that required one more additional step, and that is spinning up AWS managed Microsoft AD, that red triangle in the middle. And you spin up AWS managed Microsoft AD in the same VPC where you have your RDS instance. And then you can establish one-way trust between this AWS managed and self-managed corporate AD. Now, you can establish two-way trust. That'd be your choice. We're not requiring that. In order for this to work, it would have to be at least one-way trust, in which case the AWS managed AD becomes trusted and your self-managed corporate AD becomes trusted. It works. There's nothing wrong with that implementation. And but there is a very important limitation that you needed to be aware of, and that is the AWS managed Microsoft AD would have to be deployed in the same VPC as your RDS instance. And it's not a problem for many customers, but imagine if you're a large enterprise, then you possibly have many of these VPCs, even possibly multiple accounts. And you have all these RDS instances spread out, sitting in different VPCs and different accounts. If that's your case, then you would have to spin up that AWS AD under directory service in every single one of those VPCs. And obviously, from the cost perspective, from the maintenance perspective, that is suboptimal. So earlier this year, in February, we released a very important enhancement to this feature. And now you can join your RDS instance cross VPC and cross account boundary. So now you can accomplish something like this, something what you see on the screen right now, where usually customers provision something like shared VPC, where they deploy all of their shared resources. And that AWS managed VPC becomes one of those shared resources. And after that, you can have multiple VPCs, you can have multiple accounts, you can have RDS instances sitting in all of these accounts, and you can join the AWS managed directory, Active Directory, cross VPC, cross account boundary. Very, very cool feature. Provides very cost-effective a solution for AD integration. Please use it. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to go in depth and to talk about the details of this implementation. And if that's something you're curious about, if that's your use case, we have a great YouTube video. It's going to be down below in my references page. Please check it out. Next one, TLS version control. Very important feature because it allows you to greatly improve your RDS SQL Server instance security posture. I think it is very important for pretty much all workloads, but especially important, especially for those that require some compliance with some security frameworks, such as NIST, PCI, HIPAA come to mind. And obviously, that's not exhaustive list. That list goes on and on and on. And it is important because now you have ability to essentially pick TLS versions and the Cipher versions and enable and disable them. So the use case, the most common use case for this is, say, disabling older TLS versions like 1.0, 1.1. You can just log in into your parameter group, disable those versions, and from that moment on, those connections will be rejected. And you can do the same for older ciphers like RC4 and triple DAS. Great feature. Please check it out if compliance is something you are curious about. In-region read replica, arguably most important, most impactful release of these past 12 months. Now, in-region read replica is closely related to another feature that we had on RDS for a long time, and that is multi-AZ. It is closely related because read replica is essentially a logical extension of the multi-AZ feature because they both rely on the native feature always-on availability group. Now, let's consider for just a minute two availability zones, availability zone A and availability zone B. In availability zone A, you have node 1, which is your primary. And in availability zone B, you have node 2, which is your secondary or your hot standby. Now, every single database that you create on your node 1, on your primary, become a member of availability group called RDS AG0. And now these databases will be replicated over to the hot standby, to node 2 in availability zone B. And now every single transaction that you execute against that primary endpoint will be synchronously replicated over to availability zone B or node 2. Now, that's typical multi-Z. That feature's been around for quite some time. And our customers love multi-Z. They love the way we delivered high availability to them as a part of our managed experience. But the feedback was, all right, multi-Z is great, but we also need ability to scale out our reads. How do we do that? Because remember, that hot standby, that availability zone B node 2 replica is exclusively reserved for high availability purposes only. And we at AWS take our customer feedback very seriously. In fact, 90% of our roadmap is driven by feedback like that, feedback from our customers like yourself. And earlier this year, we released in-region read replica. Now, let's take a look at purple availability zone. Availability zone A, B, or C. That's your choice. You can put it in any one of these availability zones. Now, node 3, which is read replica, will have its own availability group called read replica availability group. And now, any transaction that you execute against your primary would still be synchronously replicated over to node 2, and at the same time, it will be asynchronously replicated over to node 3 or read replica. Very cool, very important feature. Now, let's take a quick look at some of these prerequisites and some of these limitations. It's an enterprise edition feature only. Not only enterprise only, it's 2016, 2017, and 2019 only. Now, in order for you to be able to add read replica, you have to be in multi-Z first. If you in single AZ, that feature is not available. Your backup retention should be set to any number greater than 0. I hope that makes sense. You can have only up to 5 of them. You can only have up to 5 of these read replicas, and these replicas are asynchronous only. It's not. You cannot change it to synchronous commit. That feature is not available. Now, every single read replica comes with its own endpoint. Very, very important to remember. If you open to execute your read query going against the primary endpoint, doing something like application intent read only, that's not going to work. In order to scale out your read and really leverage the read replica, you have to come through that purple read replica endpoint. Very, very important to remember. And now there's no failover between the primary and the read replica. There is a process called promotion, but promotion is something completely different. The failover doesn't change the topology of your deployment. You can fail and you can fail over and then you can fail back. Now, what promotion does, on the other hand, it completely breaks up the relationship, and by the end of this promotion is complete, you end up with completely standalone, completely separate deployment that has no relationship with the original primary. Very, very important to remember. If that's something you're curious about, if that's something you're considering deploying, we have YouTube video, we have blog posts, plus please check them out, and I also have them in my references down below. Next one. Another great feature. For those of you who are not aware, MSDTC stands for Microsoft Distributed Transaction Coordinator. And that's a great feature. It's a very important part of Microsoft ecosystem for distributed applications where you need to run your transaction across multiple instances. Now, prior to this release, this feature wasn't available on RDS, meaning you could not have your RDS instance be a participant in a distributed transaction. And now, we launched this feature earlier this year, and now it is supported. And now we support two use cases, two scenarios. The first use case involved a linked server. In this case, both of your RDS instances are managed AD joined. They are part of the same directories, part of the same domain. And then you have a client. Client connects to first instance, and that's where client starts a distributed transaction. Now, inside that transaction, obviously resources from a first instance are called, and as well as resources on the second RDS instance. Now, in this particular case, the MSDTC service that's running on the first instance where client connects to, that MSDTC assumes the role of the transaction coordinator, and MSDTC service running on the second instance, on the linked server, becomes a resource manager. Very, very important use case. The second use case involves controlling your transaction from the application itself. In this particular case, all three, the application instance that hosts application, as well as both RDS instances, are all part of the same Active Directory. And essentially, it involves relying on .NET class called transaction scope. That scope allows you to establish the transaction scope and start that distributed transaction. If in this case, MSDTC service running on the client, on the application side, assumes the role of the transaction coordinator, and services running on RDS instances are just the resource managers. Again, if that's something you want to play with, we have a great YouTube video. Again, it will be in my links down below, where we take you step by step how to set up, how to play with both of these setups. Moving on, next one, multi-file native backup. Those of you who are not aware, RDS always supported native backup. Now, because RDS is a managed platform, there is no ability to access a file system or operating system, which means that customers could not use backup database command. What they use instead, our own RDS provided storage procedure that you see on the screen right now. And one of the arguments of that signature is a location of your S3 bucket. So you give it S3 bucket, you execute the storage procedure, and then we will place your native backup in that S3 bucket. Now, up to this point, there were no ability to work with multiple files. And what that means, it means that because S3 has a hard limit of 5 terabyte at the object level, it meant that you could only work with native backups up to 5 terabyte. And now, not too long ago, we launched the support for the multi-file backup. And that's that very last argument, number of files at the very end. And now you can specify the number of files. And what that allows us to do is very, very significant. Well, first, it allows us to work with databases much larger than 5 terabytes. The second one, because now you have multiple files, you can upload and download them much faster because now you can take advantage of parallel upload. And the last one, last but not least, the performance of the backup and restore itself. Take a look at the numbers. This is a very recent test we've done. The instance we're using is R5 8x large. And we're doing 4 tests. The first test is 1 terabyte backup and restore against a GP2 volume with 1.5 terabyte volume. The second test is, again, backup and restore of 4 terabyte database against GP2, now 4.5 terabyte volume. The third test is 1 terabyte backup and restore against IO1 volume with 9,000 IOPS provisioned. And the last test is 4 terabytes backup and restore against IO1 volume with 30,000 IOPS provisioned. Compare 2 columns, the single file column and the multi-file column. And by the way, in all of these tests, we're using 4 files and compression is turned off. There is no compression to speak of here. The performance improvement is significant. I would say we average in 3x performance improvement just by going from a single file to multiple files. Great feature. Please use it. Next one, database mail. For those of you who are not aware, database mail it's a built-in SQL Server feature that gives you ability to send SMTP messages straight from your T-SQL. There's a signature on the screen right there. Now, prior to this release, you could still work with SMTP messages on RDS, but it required few workarounds, possibly setting up a Lambda function, or maybe even setting up, some customers even set up a smaller SQL Server instances on EC2 and leveraging database mail capability of that instance. But obviously, any type of workaround is suboptimal. And now, since October of this year, we support database mail out of the box. Enable it. Set up your SMTP server using either Amazon simple email service or possibly set up your own solution on EC2, self-managed, and please use it. It is available. And also we support file attachments, right? All right, next one. Amazon RDS support for integration services, reporting services, and analysis services. Great capability. Now, integration services, reporting services, and analysis services have been such an important part of Microsoft ecosystem that many decision support and business intelligence applications rely on those tools. Now, prior to this release, and we released support for these services in April-May timeframe of this year. And now, prior to that release, you could still work with those tools, but you would have to host them outside of RDS. So the typical case would be customers would spin up EC2 instances, and that's where they would install analysis services, integration services, reporting services, and they would go against the RDS instance, and that's where the production data would be. And it works. There's nothing wrong with this architecture. But obviously, it requires not only an additional EC2 instance to host these services, but also another SQL Server license, because none of these services sold separately. It's part of the same SQL Server license, right? And now these tools are supported on RDS, and you can now host them on the RDS instance itself. If that's something you are looking to do, if that's your use case, again, unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the details about limitations and prerequisites. But if that's your use case, please check out our documentation. We have great YouTube videos where we take you step by step on how to prepare the integration services packages, the RDL reports, the tabular models, and deploy them to RDS instance. Check them out. We're coming to the mixed bag. Again, we only have 30 minutes, and we've been busy. We've released tons of new capabilities. So this is a mixed bag. Please read it. I'm just going to mention two. SQL Server 2019 is available now. We also added support for Z1D instance family. For those of you who are not aware, Z1D is our CPU optimized family that is built on very fast Intel 4 gigahertz chips. These instances run at very high clock speed. So if your workload is CPU bound, please take a look at those instances, and maybe you can take advantage of them. And there is, again, random stuff. Windows authentication now available in more regions. We got more time zones. We now support native restores on database instances with read replicas. And this last one, support for service master key replication. Very important feature for all scenarios that involves a host replacement. Moving on. There is one more use case where I would like to spend a minute or two. And that's a very specific use case where, for different reasons, customers cannot bring their database workloads up to the cloud, but instead they would like to extend their cloud presence to come to them. And when I talk to my customers, I usually see two scenarios where that becomes an interesting proposition. The first one is a latency example where you have a large infrastructure, it's still sitting on-prem in your own private data center, and you cannot move your database up to the cloud because it would mean a greater latency between the rest of the application and the database up in the cloud. That's one use case. Another scenario where we see that becomes an interesting proposition, where customers under some regulatory pressure to keep their data as they are. They for regulatory reason, for data residency reasons, cannot bring the data up to the cloud. And these two cases are great cases for our Amazon RDS hybrid. Now, hybrid comes in two flavors. It comes in the form of Outpost, for those of you who have heard about that service. And also it comes in the form of Amazon RDS on VMware. Now, unfortunately, SQL Server is not supported on Outpost yet, but it is supported. It is very much supported on Amazon RDS on VMware hybrid offering. Now, we developed this service in a close collaboration with our friends from VMware. And now there is a series of steps you can take. If you currently are running VMware vSphere Enterprise Edition on-prem as your software-defined data center, there's a series of steps you can take to essentially make your on-prem infrastructure to become what we call custom regions. And essentially by doing so, you bring in all the automation, all the control plane capabilities that you can enjoy on RDS. You now bring in them to your own private infrastructure. Very, very great capability. Again, unfortunately, I don't have time to go deep on this feature. But if that's something you're curious about, if that's something you're interested about, please contact us, contact me, contact your account team, and we will be happy to discuss this use case and these capabilities with you. With that, that brings us to the end of this session. As I mentioned before, I've compiled my resources, my references, the documentation, blog posts, the YouTube videos that I mentioned. They're all here. Please check them out and stay connected. And at the very end, there is also, if you're curious about the rest of the RDS engines, we're going to have great sessions on what's new for Oracle, and we're going to have great sessions on both MySQL Aurora and Aurora Postgres. So those are the sessions 207, 302, and 303. There will be lots of great content there. Please check those sessions out. With that, again, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Again, welcome to reInvent. And again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part of your event. It's a pleasure and a privilege. And also, please do not forget to complete the session surveys. That's the only way we get better at what we do. Thank you very much.